Hi there. I hope you're fine and ready for today's session. If you recall, we talked about 5 multi-strategy approaches to teaching reading, and this week I'm going to share with you 4 more. Okay, let's look at the first approach, collaborative strategic reading, or the short form CSR. The name is self-explanatory in a sense, in that we try to teach students reading by having the students work together to collaborate towards understanding the passage. The 4 comprehension strategies here are previewing, clicking and clunking, getting the gist, and wrapping up. So let's see what the strategies are, what each of these strategies is as a teacher is using this approach. Previewing is what we have already talked about as surveying. I mean, looking at the diagrams, the heading, the subheadings, and stuff like that. Here the students are expected to spend a little time to familiarize themselves with the passage and obviously activate their schemata. This can help students improve their comprehension as they're trying to make predictions using their background knowledge. Questions like, what do you think the passage is about? What do you think you will learn from this passage? Or what questions do you expect the passage to answer? These are some of the questions that can help the learners during this stage. Next is the idea of clicking and clunking. Maybe you're not familiar with this because this is the first time we are using this terminology, but you're probably familiar with the whole idea. At this stage, the learners click and clunk while reading different parts of the passage. Now, if they understand, they click. If they don't, they clunk. Many students with reading and learning problems fail to monitor their own understanding when they read. Clicking and clunking is designed to teach students to pay attention to when they are understanding or failing to understand. So what the teacher does and asks maybe is everything clicking? Now, who has clunks about the section we have just read? Now, students know that they will be asked this question and they're alert to identify chunks during reading. And then chunks that they don't understand, of course, and they would say clunk. There are many activities you do in this phase. In this sense, this is a fix-up strategy. For instance, they can have clunk cards, they can have click cards. If they have understood anything, they will write it on the click card, and if they have failed to understand anything, they will write it on the clunk cards. They might write words or even concepts there that they don't know and they can ask. The third strategy is get the gist. Students learn to get the gist by stating the most important idea in a section of text, usually a paragraph. The goal here is to familiarize the students with the idea of paraphrasing the main idea and making sure that they have understood what they have read. And finally, wrap-up strategy, again, is self-explanatory, I think. Students review the main points by asking and answering questions in the, excuse me, in this phase. Now, here we expect to improve students' retention, their knowledge, and of course, their understanding. Students generate questions themselves and ask about important information in the passage that they have just read. Now, we can use the familiar 5 W's and an H, which means students will have to answer questions about who, what, when, where, why, and how. Now, students could assume a teacher's role in this phase and ask each other those questions. Next, we have CERT, or self-explanation reading training. This is a teacher-led training that provides students with a description of self-explanation and 6 reading strategies. After being introduced to and given examples of the strategies, the participants then practice using self-explanation. The 6 reading strategies are, as you can see on the slide, comprehension monitoring, paraphrasing, elaboration, logic or common sense, predictions, and bridging. Well, I guess we have already talked about most of these strategies, so I will only tell you about logic or common sense and bridging that we have not covered before. Well, of course, they are not very new strategies or very different from what we have already discussed, but it's good maybe a little bit of elaboration, starting with elaboration. Elaboration is making a connection between what we are reading and what we already know. Well, encouraging students to use logic and common sense would be the next strategy. This strategy helps students to understand that it is possible to make sense of the text and go beyond the text without knowing a lot about the topic. The difference between elaboration and logic is that in elaboration, we are relying on our background knowledge and adding to it by reading the passage. But in logic or common sense, we are trying to make sense of things that we might not know very much about. And finally, generating bridging inferences is the process of linking ideas and understanding the relations between separate sentences in the text. Maybe deep comprehension requires more than merely interpreting individual sentences. As a reader, you must be able to integrate individual sentences' meanings into maybe a coherent text-level representation. Next, in next approach, we have the direct explanation. The approach makes explicit the processes by which fluent readers engage in text comprehension, using direct modeling of reading strategies by teachers through thinking aloud while reading to students. Now, what this means is the teacher, as he's trying to read, or as she is reading the passage and answering maybe some questions, he thinks aloud and talks about those strategies. So the individual strategies are explained to the students. The teacher models strategy use by thinking aloud while reading the passage. Students are reminded of the key strategies and asked to use them in their own reading. So maybe the teacher says, so how do I answer this question? What should I do in this regard? And then he starts or she starts explaining all those stuff. Lessons usually in this approach conclude with explicit reflection on strategy use. So in this approach, the student is making use of such strategies as predicting, checking, summarizing, guessing meaning, and using background knowledge. And each time they're reading, they review these strategies again and again. And the final strategy that I'll be talking about today is questioning the author. Now, this is a very special approach because we do not focus on text information like the other approaches. Actually, the goal is to direct questions to the invisible author of the passage we are reading and promoting discussions around text comprehension. The questions posed by the teacher and the students are not restricted to reading comprehension questions, but maybe questioning what they are reading and questioning things like why has the writer done so or not done so? Why aren't there enough maybe examples? How many examples could be, how many more examples maybe could be used to make it more meaningful? What is maybe the meaning of this concept, and how could the writer explain that concept better? Why is this sentence unclear? What could the writer maybe do to soften the tone or make it matter of fact or even harsher? So you can see there are lots and lots of other questions that we can do. Maybe what could the writer do to make this passage more interesting? How could the writer change the ending? How could you, as a reader, write maybe a better ending or a more interesting ending? In addition to all these questions that we ask, students work on important strategies such as predicting, inferencing, establishing main ideas, monitoring, evaluating, and clarifying information. Okay, as you can see, we talked about 4 different reading strategies. Approaches. This week, besides your other activities like your vocabulary notebook and your extensive reading, you're supposed to read 1 article and answer some questions that follow. The questions are based on one of these approaches. What I want you to do is write what approach it is. I mean, the activity is based on which of these approaches, and then answer the questions that follow. Take good care of yourselves and your families. Goodbye.